Vanished Soldier. The Mysterious Disappearance of Captain Daniel Reese, 2003, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, USA. In the heart of Fort Bragg, one of America's most fortified military installations, a decorated officer vanished without a trace. No gunfire, no distress call, no signs of struggle, just an empty Jeep, an open door, and a clock frozen at 7:42 a.m. Captain Daniel Reese wasn't just another soldier. He was the kind of man who carried the weight of silence, the kind that comes with classified orders and hidden missions. But on the morning of May 18, 2003, that silence swallowed him whole. For 2 decades, his case has haunted the U.S. Army and the families who still whisper his name at candlelight vigils. Why did a loyal soldier, weeks away from deployment, simply disappear inside a base crawling with security and surveillance? And why did the military's own investigation go dark faster than the press could blink? Tonight, we open the files long buried behind restricted clearance, examining the vanishing of Captain Reese, the investigations that failed him, and the chilling questions that still echo across Fort Bragg. Because in the world of true crime, some disappearances don't happen in the shadows. They happen right under the floodlights of authority. I'm your host, and this is Dark Truth 25. Stay with us as we uncover the truth they tried to erase. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, a city within a city. Home to over 50,000 active duty personnel and some of the most secretive divisions in the U.S. Army. It's a place where order is absolute, routine is sacred, and no one simply disappears. Yet on May 18, 2003, Captain Daniel Reese, a 34-year-old Special Forces officer, did just that. At precisely 7:42 a.m., his military-issued Jeep Wrangler was found idling at the edge of Training Zone 14. Door open, keys in the ignition. Inside, his service pistol, a half-empty coffee thermos, and a folder labeled deployment brief. But Daniel Reese was nowhere to be found. By noon, an internal alert spread through the base, possible AWOL. By dusk, the term changed to officer missing. And within 48 hours, the case would become one of the most unsettling disappearances ever recorded inside an American military compound. Reese wasn't a man known for chaos. He was the embodiment of structure, steady, methodical, and known among his men for one phrase: the mission is the man. He had served 3 overseas tours and was days away from a 4th, this time with a classified task force operating under U.S. Central Command. But in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, those closest to him noticed subtle changes: insomnia, late-night drives, and cryptic notes left on his desk. One of them simply read, "If anything happens, check the convoy manifests." Still, nobody imagined that anything would happen. Fort Bragg wasn't the kind of place where people vanished without cause. At least, that's what everyone believed, until Captain Daniel Reese never reported for duty, and the Army's official statements began to contradict themselves. By day 3, the base was on full lockdown. CID investigators questioned soldiers, sealed Reese's quarters, and confiscated his communications. But the first official report to Reese's family didn't come from Fort Bragg Command. It came from an anonymous call to his wife. A male voice said 6 words: "They know. Don't trust the files." For the Reese family, that call marked the beginning of a 2-decade fight for truth, one that would expose buried reports, restricted access, and a pattern of disappearances no one wanted to admit existed. As the base tightened its silence, those who knew Captain Reese began to wonder: did a soldier break down under pressure? Or did he uncover something the military couldn't risk revealing? The perfect officer. Before he became a headline, Captain Daniel Reese was known as the perfect officer. 12 years of clean service. A soldier's soldier, respected by superiors, trusted by his men. Born in Raleigh, North Carolina, Reese joined the Army straight out of college, driven by a mix of patriotism and family legacy. His father had served in Vietnam, his grandfather in World War II. To the Reese family, duty wasn't just a calling. It was a tradition written into their bloodline. By 2003, Daniel had served in Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He was due for promotion, and with it, a new assignment one classified beyond standard clearance. His orders were coded Operation Sentinel. He never told his wife what it involved, only that it would be, in his words, the last one before we start over. Those words would haunt her later. In the weeks before his disappearance, Reese's colleagues noticed subtle but alarming changes. He was distracted, restless, and more withdrawn than usual. His closest friend, Sergeant Cole Maddox, recalled. He stopped laughing. Even small talk felt like interrogation. At home, Reese was equally distant. His wife, Lauren, told investigators that Daniel had begun waking in the middle of the night, sometimes pacing the hallway, sometimes standing by the window staring toward the woods behind their quarters. When she asked what was wrong, he always answered the same way, just running through the mission. But one night, she found him writing something in a notebook, then tearing the pages out and burning them in the sink. Whatever was on those pages, he didn't want anyone to see. Still, outwardly, nothing seemed extraordinary. Reese attended briefings, checked in with his commanding officer, and signed off on transport manifests for an upcoming supply convoy. Routine, efficient, normal. Until one evening, a week before his disappearance, he arrived home looking pale and shaken. He sat down at the kitchen table and told his wife, quietly, "If anyone asks, I never got on that convoy." It was the last full conversation they ever had. On paper, Captain Daniel Reese was a model officer. But behind the uniform, cracks were forming, cracks that hinted he'd seen something he wasn't meant to see. And within days, those cracks would swallow him whole. The morning of May 18th, 2003. The morning Captain Daniel Reese vanished began like any other day at Fort Bragg. Reveille sounded at 0600 hours. The air was thick with Carolina humidity, and the base moved in rhythm. Boots on gravel, truck engines humming, orders echoing across the parade ground. But inside Quarters 14B, something was different. Lauren Reese remembers waking to silence. No coffee brewing, no uniform laid out. Her husband's side of the bed was cold. The digital clock read 5:42 a.m. Daniel was gone. His truck, a silver Ford F-150, was still parked in the driveway. But his duffel bag, dog tags, and field jacket were missing. Lauren assumed he'd been called in early, not unusual for officers of his clearance level. But by noon, when he hadn't checked in or answered his pager, she began to worry. By 2 p.m., she drove to his office. That's when the unease turned to confusion. His workspace was untouched, a mug of half-finished coffee, a notepad filled with half-erased coordinates, and an open folder marked Sentinel, movement log. When she asked Captain Reese's commanding officer, Major Wilkins, about his location, the answer was simple and chilling. Captain Reese is on convoy assignment. He left at dawn, but there was one major problem. No convoy had left that morning. Not from Fort Bragg, not from any nearby base. Military police verified all outgoing transports. No record, no signatures, nothing. That's when the search began. By evening, Reese's photo was circulated internally through base communications. Search teams swept the surrounding woods. Helicopters scanned the perimeter. Within 48 hours, the FBI joined the investigation. But what they found only deepened the mystery. 2 miles from a northern perimeter fence, near a dirt service road, they discovered tire impressions matching Reese's truck, but no sign of the vehicle itself. Next to the tracks was a single boot print, and beside it, a small, metallic tag with partial engraving. Sent 3. DNA tests confirmed the print belonged to Captain Reese. But beyond that, the trail ended. His bank cards were untouched. His phone never reconnected. And despite a base-wide security review, not a single camera recorded his departure. It was as if Captain Daniel Reese had simply stepped out of existence, taking with him whatever he had uncovered about Operation Sentinel. What made a loyal soldier abandon everything overnight? And what secret was so dangerous that it erased him completely? The search begins. By May 20th, the disappearance of Captain Daniel Reese had transformed from an internal query into a full-scale military investigation. The commanding office at Fort Bragg was on lockdown. Every entry log, duty roster, and convoy manifest was scrutinized. But the results made no sense. The last confirmed record of Reese's presence was his security swipe at 4:57 a.m. in the West Operations Building. After that, nothing. A ghost in the system. Major Wilkins ordered a 20-mile perimeter search. Helicopters combed the dense Carolina woods. Thermal drones scanned the riverbanks. Teams of military police, state officers, and FBI agents moved shoulder to shoulder through muddy terrain. For 72 hours, they found nothing. Then, on the fourth day, a break. Ranger units located a section of trampled brush near the Little River, about 5 miles north of base limits. There, partially buried beneath pine needles, was a torn piece of camouflage fabric and a shattered pager. Military issue, serial number matched to Reese. The discovery reignited the search, but what came next froze investigators in place. That night, while canvassing nearby, one ranger reported hearing what he described as metallic knocking echoing from deep within the forest, rhythmic, mechanical, and distant. When the sound was traced, they found only an abandoned communications relay, cold, inactive for months. Yet inside its rusted shell lay a small notebook, wrapped in plastic. Its pages were smeared with mud, but 3 words remained legible. Sentinel, Level 3. Investigators sent it straight to Army intelligence. By morning, it had vanished from the evidence room. Every trace of it gone. No chain of custody signature, no record. That was the first real fracture in the case, and the first time the FBI questioned whether the Army truly wanted Daniel Reese found. What had started as a missing persons case was beginning to look like a containment effort, because every document, every call, every lead that pointed toward Operation Sentinel seemed to disappear, just like Captain Reese himself. And somewhere in those shadows of Fort Bragg, someone was making sure the truth stayed buried. Whispers and warnings. By the end of May 2003, the official story had collapsed under its own weight. Every press release contradicted the last. The Army claimed Captain Reese was on extended assignment. The FBI classified him as missing under exceptional circumstances. Behind closed doors, the whispers started. 2 enlisted men from the base approached investigators with statements, off the record. They claimed Captain Reese had expressed concerns about log discrepancies in the Sentinel program weeks before he vanished. He'd even requested transfer paperwork, a move that was quietly denied. One soldier recalled Reese's final conversation in the officers' mess hall. He reportedly told a colleague, "If something happens to me, tell them to check the Northern Relay logs." That same colleague, Sergeant Alvarez, would later refuse further comment. Weeks later, he was reassigned overseas without explanation. Then came a call, a civilian tip, logged June 3rd, from an untraceable number. A male voice, calm but distorted, stated simply, "Stop asking about Sentinel. He's not missing. He's contained." The message was analyzed, traced through multiple proxy lines, and ultimately dismissed as a hoax. But the tone, cold, precise, rehearsed, felt anything but random. Within days, files related to Operation Sentinel were sealed under the National Security Exemption Act. Even the FBI lost jurisdiction. For the first time, the Reese family realized this wasn't just about a missing soldier. This was about something bigger. And the more the press pressed for answers, the more the Pentagon tightened its grip. Journalists were threatened with legal action. A regional newspaper that tried to publish an expose had its offices raided for security breaches. Yet, behind every official denial, the same question grew louder. What did Captain Reese discover that made him vanish? And was he silenced, not by an enemy, but by the very institution he served? The classified silence. By mid-June 2003, the case of Captain Daniel Reese had entered a new phase, one the public would never hear about. The official Joint Task Force was quietly disbanded. FBI field offices were instructed to redirect all inquiries to the Department of Defense. And the Reese family was told, in writing, that continued investigation poses a risk to national integrity. That was the exact phrasing, national integrity. In the weeks that followed, several key investigators found themselves reassigned, demoted, or abruptly transferred. One civilian analyst, a data specialist who'd reviewed the Fort Bragg surveillance feeds, was found dead in her apartment. Official cause: suicide. Unofficially, her colleagues said she'd been terrified. She told a friend days before they deleted something from the footage, something that moved. Every FOIA request related to Operation Sentinel was denied. Every trace of the internal communications log was redacted beyond recognition. Even the Reese family's access to his personal items was restricted. Lauren Reese later stated that the Army returned her husband's belongings in 2 sealed boxes. Inside were clothes, photos, and a burned notebook with half the pages missing. But one page remained legible, scorched but intact. Sentinel active. When reporters tried to press for answers, Pentagon officials refused interviews. One anonymous spokesperson said off-record, "There's no missing officer. That file doesn't exist." Yet payroll logs showed Reese's pay had been suspended 5 days after his disappearance. His personnel file was deleted. His ID badge was deactivated. Everything about Captain Daniel Reese, his name, his records, his service, was being erased. And that's when even his closest allies began to realize. This wasn't incompetence. This was intentional. A deliberate, coordinated silence. One that hinted at something buried beneath Fort Bragg's soil, something worth hiding at any cost. Shadows of command. As investigators dug deeper into Captain Daniel Reese's disappearance, the focus began to shift, away from the barracks and training fields, and toward the higher echelons of Fort Bragg's command. The longer the case lingered without resolution, the clearer it became that this was not a simple case of desertion or misadventure. Something larger, something colder was at play. Within the base, whispers spread through the ranks. Junior officers spoke in low tones about the captain who knew too much. Rumors surfaced that Reese had stumbled upon classified information during a recent operation briefing, something involving covert transfers, off-the-book missions, and unreported casualties. To some, it sounded like conspiracy talk. To others, it explained everything. One of Reese's closest friends, Sergeant First Class Martin Hollis, later revealed to investigators that Daniel had been unusually tense during their final conversation. Hollis recalled him saying, "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident." It was a chilling statement that would take on grim significance in the weeks that followed. As military investigators began pulling communication logs and personal correspondences, they discovered discrepancies. Emails deleted from servers, missing pages from Reese's notebook, and an access card last used at a restricted storage site known as Building 47B. Inside that building, according to records, Reese had authorization to review a shipment manifest connected to an unnamed, classified operation. The file was later sealed by military intelligence. Outside Fort Bragg, media attention intensified. Civilian reporters camped at the gates, pushing for answers, demanding transparency. Yet every official statement seemed scripted, cold, precise, and strangely uniform. Reese's family, once hopeful, grew frustrated. His wife, Emily, appeared before the press, her voice trembling. "I don't care about rank or protocol. I just want to know what happened to my husband." But the military stonewall held firm. Requests for information were delayed or outright denied. When journalists filed Freedom of Information Act requests, the responses were heavily redacted. Entire pages blacked out, names omitted, timelines blurred. Inside Fort Bragg, the tension was suffocating. Officers avoided eye contact when questioned, while others quietly requested transfers. To speak about Captain Reese was to invite scrutiny, or worse. The men and women who had served with him described an eerie sense of being watched, as though someone wanted the entire matter to fade away. Yet, not everyone was willing to stay silent. A civilian contractor who requested anonymity reached out to local media, claiming he'd seen something unusual on the night of Reese's disappearance. A convoy of unmarked vehicles leaving the base at 2:47 a.m., heading toward the dense woodland bordering the facility. No one could confirm it, but his description of the convoy's timing aligned perfectly with the last recorded use of Reese's access card. By this point, the disappearance had evolved from a missing persons case into a labyrinth of secrets. Every new lead only deepened the confusion. Some suspected espionage. Others whispered about an internal cover-up. The phrase classified containment began appearing in anonymous tips sent to investigators and journalists alike. The official investigation slowed to a crawl. Reese's personal belongings were sealed, his case file stamped pending. The military silence grew louder than any denial. And as the days turned into months, even those who had once believed in the institution's integrity began to doubt. Something about this disappearance wasn't procedural. It was deliberate. Captain Daniel Reese had not simply vanished. He had been erased. The silent files. Months had passed since Captain Daniel Reese's disappearance, and Fort Bragg had begun to settle into a strange rhythm of denial. The official narrative was fixed. Ongoing investigation. No foul play suspected. But inside the walls of the base, a quiet unease lingered. Soldiers whispered that the captain's office lights were sometimes seen flickering late at night, even though the door had been sealed by command. Others swore they heard his name in fragments of radio chatter, call signs that hadn't been used since the week he vanished. Still, the deeper questions persisted. Where had Captain Reese gone? And why did those who asked too many questions start to disappear from the conversation? In late November 2003, a young intelligence analyst named Corporal Linda Greer, known for her persistence, was reassigned after reportedly accessing Reese's encrypted personnel logs without clearance. Her superiors claimed it was a routine administrative move, but Greer confided in a friend before leaving Fort Bragg. They're hiding something. His file isn't just missing, it's been rewritten. What did that mean? When investigators compared her claims with the official documents, they noticed subtle inconsistencies. Dates didn't align. Orders referenced operations that, according to Pentagon records, had never existed. A name, Project Talon, appeared faintly stamped on a redacted page. No one could determine what it meant, but it would soon become central to the case. Outside military walls, a freelance journalist named Eric Walsh refused to let the story die. He'd covered war-zone disappearances before, but something about Reese's case disturbed him. It's like trying to track a ghost, he told a local station. His persistence paid off when an anonymous source, calling themselves Echo 7, sent him an unmarked package containing a single flash drive. On that drive were fragments of internal communications, all dated within 48 hours of Reese's disappearance. The subject line on one of the emails read, "Containment protocol activated, subject R. No sender, no recipient. Just metadata linking it to a secured terminal inside Building 47B, the same location Reese had last accessed." The military denied everything. But Walsh's findings sparked a quiet storm online. Conspiracy forums exploded with theories. Some claimed Reese had uncovered war crimes. Others suggested he defected after learning of covert operations overseas. And then there were the more unsettling whispers that Reese had been part of an experiment in psychological warfare, and that his disappearance was the result of an operation gone wrong. For Emily Reese, these theories were torture. Each new rumor twisted the knife of uncertainty. She appeared on a televised interview, her eyes tired but determined. If Daniel's alive, someone knows. And if he's gone, someone's responsible. The interviewer pressed her about the military silence. Emily paused, then said something that would echo across the internet. The truth doesn't vanish. People make it vanish. Meanwhile, Eric Walsh's source went dark. His emails bounced. Calls were never returned. Then, one cold morning, a plain manila envelope was found at his doorstep. No note, no name, just a photograph inside. It showed a single man walking near a restricted section of the base, his head turned away. The timestamp read December 2nd, 2003, 5 months after Daniel Reese was declared missing. Walsh took the photo to digital analysts. But before he could publish the story, his website was suddenly taken offline by an unexplained system breach. He filed a police report the next day, and then, 2 weeks later, Walsh himself went missing. No one ever found his car. No trace of his laptop. No answers. What began as one soldier's disappearance was now spiraling into something much bigger. A chain reaction of silence and fear stretching far beyond Fort Bragg. It was becoming clear. Whatever truth lay buried in those sealed files, someone was willing to bury anyone who got too close. The whistleblower. By early 2004, the disappearance of Captain Daniel Reese had become more than a cold case. It was a quiet scandal. Within Fort Bragg, the mere mention of his name could end a conversation. Outside, online forums and underground journalists had begun to weave theories of corruption, espionage, and psychological warfare. But among the noise, one voice began to rise above the rest. Someone who claimed to know what really happened. The first communication came in the form of a hand-delivered envelope to a local newspaper in Fayetteville. Inside were two things: a typewritten note and a photocopy of a classified clearance form stamped with Reese's name. The note was brief, just 7 words. He was part of something they couldn't control. The newspaper dismissed it as another hoax, until 2 days later, the editor's car was broken into and the envelope was gone. At the same time, an independent investigative journalist named Marie Holden, who had worked with Eric Walsh before his disappearance, received an encrypted message from a sender calling themselves Sentinel. The message read, "If you want the truth about Captain Reese, meet me where it started." Attached was a GPS coordinate, an area near the wooded perimeter of Fort Bragg, close to where the convoy had been sighted on the night Reese vanished. Marie was cautious. She contacted Reese's wife, Emily, and together they made the trip. As they arrived at the isolated location, the silence of the forest pressed in around them. There, hidden under a loose plank near an abandoned storage shed, they discovered a weathered box sealed with tape. Inside were 2 items: a stack of old floppy disks labeled Talon and a single dog tag engraved D. Reese, U.S. Army. When the disks were later examined by a cybersecurity expert, fragments of encrypted logs emerged. References to psychological endurance trials, unauthorized personnel transfers, and something labeled Cognitive Disruption Protocol. The implications were chilling. Had Captain Reese been part of a secret project that blurred the line between mind and obedience? Before Marie could verify the files, her contact, Sentinel, resurfaced one last time with a stark warning. "You're not chasing a disappearance. You're chasing containment. They'll make you vanish too." Days later, military police were reported combing the same wooded area. No warrant, no announcement. When journalists questioned the operation, officials claimed it was a routine training exercise. But those who lived near the base knew better. They'd seen similar convoys once before, back in July 2003, the night Captain Reese disappeared. In March 2004, Marie Holden published a detailed expose under the headline, "The Vanished Soldier: Secrets the Military Won't Release." The article went viral, drawing both attention and intimidation. Her email accounts were hacked, her office vandalized, and unmarked vehicles began idling outside her home. But the piece had done its job. It reignited public interest and forced the Department of Defense to issue a rare statement. Their response was chillingly clinical. No evidence has been found connecting Captain Daniel Reese's disappearance to any classified or unauthorized activity. The case remains open but inactive. Inactive, a single word that told the world everything it needed to know. Behind the scenes, Emily Reese was quietly compiling her own file, letters, photographs, and the recovered disks. With help from Marie and a few trusted contacts, she began mapping out patterns, names that appeared repeatedly in the redacted reports, flight logs, and military memos. One name kept resurfacing: Colonel Nathaniel Briggs, a commanding officer who had personally signed off on Reese's last mission authorization. Briggs was later reassigned overseas, without interview, without comment. But the silence only deepened suspicion. The people who sought the truth about Captain Reese had started to vanish themselves: journalists, contractors, even lower-ranking officers. One by one, their voices fell quiet. It was no longer a story about one man's disappearance. It was a pattern, systematic, deliberate, and terrifyingly efficient. Somewhere deep in the structure of command, the answer existed. But to find it, someone would have to step beyond secrecy and into danger. Beneath the surface, by the spring of 2004, the disappearance of Captain Daniel Reese had become a haunting shadow over Fort Bragg. The official investigation had stalled, the press had moved on, and those who dared to keep asking questions were either reassigned, silenced, or made to disappear into bureaucratic fog. But for Emily Reese and Marie Holden, stopping was no longer an option. The case had taken everything from them, and the truth was now the only thing left to lose. Emily had grown colder, sharper. Months of unanswered calls and redacted reports had hardened her grief into resolve. Marie, too, had changed. She was no longer chasing a story. She was chasing accountability. Together, they began to piece together the fragments left behind. The floppy disks, the leaked files, the unexplained movements of Colonel Nathaniel Briggs. One night, Marie received an anonymous message through a secure email service. The sender called themselves Ghostline. The message read, "If you want answers, look below. The base has levels they don't list." Attached was a crude map, not of the visible sections of Fort Bragg, but of an underground network labeled CUB Facility 12. Among the scrawled notes was one familiar name, Project Talon. When Emily showed the document to a retired engineer who had once worked on infrastructure contracts for the military, he confirmed something chilling. Yes, there are underground structures. They were built decades ago during Cold War expansions, officially for storage and testing. Unofficially, who knows? That revelation set their plan into motion. Marie used her remaining contacts in the press to obtain a temporary clearance under the pretext of a follow-up on defense budgeting. Emily, meanwhile, managed to secure an invitation to the base's family memorial ceremony, a yearly event commemorating fallen service members. It would be the perfect cover for both of them to get inside. On the morning of April 23, 2004, the two women entered Fort Bragg for what they privately called the final search. The base was alive with uniformed personnel, salutes, and speeches. But while the ceremony unfolded outside, Marie slipped away, heading toward the administrative wing where the blueprints indicated a sealed elevator shaft leading underground. The door was locked, coded, and under camera watch, except that one camera, according to the maintenance schedule Marie had memorized, had been disabled for servicing. With trembling hands, she swiped an old clearance card left behind by one of her former contacts in logistics. Against all odds, the light turned green. The elevator descended slowly, humming through the air like a heartbeat. When the doors opened, she stepped into silence. The corridor stretched endlessly, lined with metal doors and flickering fluorescent lights. On one wall, faded letters spelled out, Talon Research Division, Active Operations Unit. Marie's recorder captured everything, the faint hum of machines, the echo of her footsteps, and the low whine of distant ventilation. She entered one of the rooms. Inside, she found what looked like an observation chamber, glass walls, medical restraints, and a control console still faintly glowing with power. On the monitor, an archived file blinked. Subject D. Reese. Status. Terminated June 12, 2003. Marie froze. The date, less than 2 weeks after Reese was declared missing. The entry suggested he hadn't vanished at all. He'd been classified. But before she could photograph the screen, she heard voices. Footsteps, not hers, moving fast down the corridor. She grabbed her recorder and slipped behind a partition as two uniformed men entered the room. One spoke quietly. Command wants this entire floor cleared. No digital traces, no backups. The other replied, already done. Everything goes to Raven Division by morning. Marie waited until the voices faded before retreating toward the elevator. When she surfaced, she found Emily waiting in the crowd, panic etched across her face. You were gone too long, she whispered. They're looking for you. That night, the two fled the base under cover of darkness. Marie uploaded her audio recordings and documents to a secure drive, one she shared with 2 trusted contacts overseas, just in case. Then she called Emily, her voice shaking. He didn't disappear, Emily. They erased him. Emily didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was steady. Then we make sure the world knows his name. But the world would not be kind. The next morning, Marie's hotel room was found empty. No signs of struggle. Her phone and laptop missing. The file she'd uploaded was gone from every cloud server it had been sent to. Only one copy remained, the encrypted backup Emily had hidden at home. The truth now rested entirely in her hands. And the people who made Daniel Reese vanish were closing in. The last transmission. 3 days after Marie Holden vanished, Emily Reese found herself standing at the edge of her driveway in Boston, clutching a small envelope that had been slid under her door sometime during the night. There was no return address, no handwriting, just a plain seal and a single word printed in black ink across the front. Talon. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a memory card and a single line written on a torn notepad. "He left this for you. Don't trust anyone." Emily loaded the card onto her computer. What she found would both confirm her worst fears and ignite a nationwide storm. The file contained a short, grainy video recorded in a dimly lit room. The man in the frame was gaunt, unshaven, and dressed in fatigues. His voice was weak, but unmistakable. It was Captain Daniel Reese. "If you're watching this," he began, then I didn't make it out. "Project Talon isn't what they told us. They were testing us, pushing human limits. I saw men lose themselves, not from combat, but from what they were doing to our minds." He coughed, lowering his head before continuing. "They said it was to make us stronger. But the truth is, they broke something in us, something that can't be fixed. I tried to report it. That's why I'm gone." The video cut abruptly, ending with a timestamp. June 10th, 2003, 2:41 a.m. Emily sat in silence, tears welling in her eyes. She replayed the clip over and over, listening for any background noise, any clue that could point to where it had been recorded. In the faint hum behind his voice, a sharp-eared audio technician later detected a pattern. 3 distinct pulses that matched the electrical frequency used in underground power systems at Fort Bragg. It was proof. Captain Reese had been speaking from within the very facility the military denied existed. Emily knew she couldn't keep it hidden. Within 24 hours, she reached out to a network of independent journalists, some who had worked with Marie, others who had followed the case from afar. They agreed to release the footage simultaneously across multiple channels, making it impossible for anyone to suppress it quietly. When the video went live, it exploded across every platform. Viewers were horrified, fascinated, and divided. Some claimed it was fabricated, a conspiracy hoax designed to discredit the military. Others recognized Daniel's face and uniform from official service photos. Public outcry grew. Major news outlets picked up the story, demanding a response from the Pentagon. The Department of Defense issued a curt statement. The video in question cannot be authenticated. Captain Daniel Reese remains missing and presumed deceased. Project Talon has no official record of existence. But the words rang hollow. For the first time, the silence had cracks in it. Anonymous insiders began to leak more fragments, transport logs, clearance rosters, internal memos referencing Talon Subject 3. Each leak added to the growing storm, painting a picture of psychological experimentation, unauthorized conditioning programs, and buried casualties. Within months, a congressional inquiry was announced, though many doubted it would ever reach the truth. Too many names, too many files had already been erased. Emily testified before the committee, holding her husband's dog tags in her hand. "They can deny everything," she said, "but my husband didn't vanish. He was taken, and there are others like him." Her words echoed across the room and across the nation. But even as the hearings began, strange things continued to happen. Witnesses reported break-ins. Evidence disappeared. Digital files went missing from secure servers. Someone was still cleaning up the past. The inquiry quietly dissolved a year later. No conclusions. No charges. Officially, Captain Daniel Reese remained missing in action. Yet, deep in the corners of the internet, his story lived on, shared, debated, immortalized. The last frame of his video became a haunting emblem. A man who looked straight into the camera, weary but defiant, as though daring the world to remember. "If I disappear," he'd said, "don't let them write my ending." And the world never did. Because every time his story is told, every time his name is spoken, the silence cracks again. Captain Daniel Reese may have vanished, But his truth refuses to die. 2 decades later, the U.S. Army still lists Captain Daniel Reese as presumed deceased. But for those who knew him, the story doesn't rest there. Too many files sealed. Too many witnesses silenced. Too many nights where Fort Bragg's barracks still echo with unanswered questions. Was Reese silenced for what he uncovered? Or did the uniform hide a man already at war with his conscience? We may never know. But every soldier leaves a shadow, and some shadows never fade. If you believe this case deserves another look, share this story. Like, comment, and tell us what you think really happened inside Fort Bragg that morning. Your voice keeps these unsolved cases alive. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop searching for the dark truth. 25.